David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's talk about socialism. There's been more and more talk about socialism since, I guess really since Bernie Sanders' presidential candidacy in 2016. And you can call Bernie whatever you want, but he supports policies of social democracy, not actual democratic socialism. And then now with the win by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the 14th district of New York, which we told you last week, defeating the incumbent Democrat there, once again, we're seeing this massive confusion about what is democratic socialism versus what is social democracy. And what I want to tell you today isn't that democratic socialism is good or not good. That's for you to decide. And on a follow-up show next week, I'm actually going to talk to you about which of the two I believe makes more sense, although I'll give you a little preview of that in a few minutes. What I want to talk to you about today is that a lot of people are really misunderstanding some elements of what's going on here. And I'm going to get into more detail about this. But the main confusion is that democratic socialism is in principle socialism, meaning the shared or public ownership of the means of production, period. Now, we'll get to whether that meaning has changed, even according to the Democratic Socialists of America. But what we have to understand, if there's one point that I can drill home here, it's that social democracy is a capitalist economy with a private sector, with private ownership of business, but it is a form of capitalism that is, we can call it progressive, for lack of a better term, and it socializes, I would say, some elements of the economy, maybe healthcare, for example. It promotes strong economic support of the commons, so on and so forth. So the key difference is democratic socialism usually calls for the abolition of capitalism as an economic system, whereas social democracy wants to fix the problems of capitalism and create a stronger social safety net, more like what we see in Scandinavian economies. Now, you might be wondering, wait a second, I haven't heard Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez say she wants to take all business from private hands and make them publicly owned. And I would say that's right. I also haven't heard that. And that's where the confusion is coming from. Because many of the candidates that are claiming to be democratic socialists, or sometimes they're not even saying it, but they're being branded as democratic socialists, are actually social democrats. And I'm not even sure if they know it. But what most of these candidates are talking about is not democratic socialism, it's social democracy. Now, there's a couple other things, I guess I'd say, to understand. One is that DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, has started to come up with much broader definitions of democratic socialism, which aren't really socialist. They're actually more like social democracy. Now, you could say that's a good thing because it means that democratic socialism is being moderated. Or you might say, well, no, it's bad. If it's not actually democratic socialism, then it shouldn't call itself democratic socialism. It should say we are social democrats, for example. The other thing is that it's possible that the candidates being branded or self-describing as democratic socialists actually do want to socialize the means of production and eliminate private ownership of business, but they simply haven't mentioned that yet. That would be a real problem because lots of people wouldn't want that. So it would be good if these are actual democratic socialists, it might be a good time to explain to us what your plan is for taking over control of the means of production and giving it to the public. When people talk about Scandinavian-style regulated economies that want to reduce income inequality and provide a basic standard of living for everybody, that's not socialism, that's social democracy. And now I'll get to my view, and I'll expand on this next week. And you know that this is my view, Pat, and a lot of people in the audience know. I happen not to think that socialism is the way forward. That's a debate we can have. Private ownership of business, the possibilities of entrepreneurship, these are some of the catalysts of creativity and innovation and development that I wouldn't want to lose, which I believe we would lose in an actual socialist system. But we need to ensure that just because some people can't get hugely successful, we aren't saying you're going to fall by the wayside, right? We aren't going to ignore others. We need to ensure that everybody is taken care of. Democratic socialism, public ownership of the means of production, goes in the direction of wanting equality of outcome, which I don't think is a realistic goal. If you look at almost any endeavor, this is where I almost align a little bit with Jordan Peterson. You see that equality of outcome is just not realistic unless you do some really authoritarian, radical things, which I'm against. I'm not an authoritarian. Social democracy is more along the lines of equality of opportunity with a safety net for those who don't take advantage because they choose not to or are unable to of that opportunity. Understand that there's a distribution curve that develops in most endeavors, whether it's business success, skill in sports like soccer, whatever, educational outcomes. Let's work with that to actually lift all boats, set up a system that will let the innovation flourish as much as possible towards the top, while also raising the baseline for everyone, which is what social democracy wants to do. I believe that over the long term, we are hurt by confusion over democratic socialism as a form of actual socialism versus social democracy. If the candidates don't know whether they're socialists, if the voters can't tell the difference, these are real problems that I'm concerned about.
I agree, because political branding, political messaging, all that stuff matters. And, socialism is maybe becoming less of a taboo word, particularly among the millennial generation.
Definitely.
But not among everyone. And if, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Summer Lee, who's running in Pennsylvania, if they're actually social democrats, it would be in their best interest to run as them, not as democratic socialists.
And the truth is that you can say, David, this is mostly semantics. It's clearly social democracy, but democratic socialists are not actually socialists anymore. They're social democrats. I think that the semantics of it actually have a real impact. I think that the policies of social democrats are very popular in the United States when polled fairly, right? Not do you support a government takeover of healthcare, but do you believe that the government has a duty to provide a baseline, basic level of care for everybody, regardless of their ability to pay? You get a lot of support for that. You don't get a lot of support for, do you believe that private ownership of the means of production should be abolished and that should become socialized? Not a lot of people support that. So I think that the confusion that has grown is significant as far as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez goes. Let's first figure out, is she a democratic socialist? And if so, what is her plan for socializing the means of production? Or let's clarify that she's not actually a democratic socialist, but rather just a social democrat. Send me your thoughts on this. I want to hear from you. I think that this stuff really matters. And there is an opportunity here because of the openness to the term socialism that we've seen, not for a long time, that we're seeing now, to actually make some real inroads. But we've got to be able to identify what these different movements are. I am not happy to have to tell you this today, but I have to tell you this today because it's the undeniable reality. Donald Trump is very quickly retreating from his claims of just a total earth-shattering victory of heroic nature with the Singapore summit involving North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un. Just last week, Donald Trump was claiming that we were already seeing very fast denuclearization taking place by North Korea. Now Trump is backing off. He's using the word possible to describe the North Korea deal, and he's talking about how it may not, quote, work out at all. How quickly things change in just days. We were told that this was the deal to end all deals. Trump told us Kim Jong-un is not only trustworthy, but he's smart, and he's funny, and he's a great negotiator, and he's just an all-around really fun person, Trump led us to believe. We were told the deal was already becoming a reality, and none of it is true. And we learned last week that North Korea is allegedly expanding a nuclear research site. And now Donald Trump has completely changed his language altogether. He was interviewed over the holiday weekend on Fox News Sunday. And just listen to the language he's using. Very different language from what we heard in the 48 hours following the summit. Take a look.
A deal with him.
President Trump told Fox News Sunday he trusted Kim Jong-un would dismantle his nuclear program, but admitted the deal they agreed to in Singapore last month could fall apart.
Have I been in deals? Have you been in things where people didn't work out? It's possible.
That's far from the president's confident tone arriving home from the summit. There's no longer a nuclear threat. But new satellite imagery shows expansion of a missile manufacturing site capable of producing missiles that could hit U.S. military installations in Asia.
So as a reminder, the language when Trump landed from the summit was drastically different. They put up part of that tweet. Let's actually look at that tweet. Trump said, quote, "Just landed, a long trip, but everybody can now feel much safer than the day I took office." Yeah, right. There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Meeting with Kim Jong-Un was an interesting and very positive experience. North Korea has great potential in the future. Donald Trump is also completely changing his explanation of what he promised Kim Jong-un. Remember that at the summit, Trump agreed to end a whole bunch of joint military exercises with South Korea. Trump now is claiming during that same Fox News interview, I believe it was with Maria Bartiromo, total softball interview. I mean, really embarrassing for Maria. Saying, quote, "We gave nothing. I went there. So the papers say he went. So we had a meeting. We didn't do anything." Trump, in his own words about the previously heroic meeting, is saying, so we had a meeting. We didn't do anything. And this is the preparing himself to be able to say, if and when it doesn't work out, listen, we didn't give them anything. All we did was have a meeting. That's all. And it's actually even worse because the one thing that North Korea did agree to do that was sort of notable, remember, most of what North Korea agreed to was the same stuff that they had agreed to many times before and never followed through on. The one unique element of the agreement that North Korea agreed to in principle was to repatriate the remains of American troops that were killed during the Korean War. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, makes you throw up a little bit in your mouth when you even say that. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said a few days ago that it hasn't happened. He was asked during a hearing with the Senate Appropriations Committee whether the repatriation of the remains is happening, and he said, "We have not yet physically received them." And when he was asked, so to speak, whether they were in the mail, refused to say anything else. I don't want to be crass, but do we even really believe that North Korea has the remains of soldiers from 65 years ago? I'm not saying it's impossible. Like, of course they might. But do we even believe that they have these remains? I genuinely have no idea.
And even so, it's not the best trade-off, right? We get those remains back, and in exchange, we get to, remove the military exercise we were doing with the South Koreans or eliminate sanctions. It's not a very good exchange for the United States.
Possible security guarantees, which of course we, as usual, the term is thrown around. We don't actually know. What do those guarantees mean? We still haven't even heard that. In any case, absolute and utter diplomatic joke. Remember that Trump said all along, the press and the fake news and Democrats, whoever, they're trying to undermine the historic deal. Now Trump is saying we did nothing. We had a meeting and we have a possible deal, and deals don't always work out. And the scariest thing about all of this is that Trump did the summit. He bragged about it. He called it this massive geopolitical victory. His claims were widely reported. And later Trump will claim, no, but we never claimed unilateral victory. It was no big deal, even if I called it a victory, because it doesn't always work out. And these are just possible deals, and we didn't commit anything to begin with. And his followers will go with it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, I feel like this whole thing has just been reduced to a photo opportunity.
Yeah.
But some would say it was that from the beginning.
That's actually all it was. And I think that now it's even Trump in his sort of coded delusions of grandeur language effectively acquiescing to that. Send me your thoughts about this, also about our conversation about socialism and social democracy. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We'll take a quick break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Big thank you to Charlene Briggs, today's new member of the day. And I was awestruck and inspired, Pat, over the vacation with the number of new members and new patrons who, after I said, listen, normalization is making it so that people are forgetting about the importance of supporting independent media, the audience reacted, and we had dozens and dozens of new people sign up for membership, dozens and dozens of new patrons. And Charlene is just one of many great people that are now supporting the program.
And now that we're actually back from vacation, they can start using those member and Patreon benefits.
Yeah,
too.
that's right. A lot of people concerned during the break that the show once again had gone off the air because there were no new shows for a couple days because of 4th of July. But we're here and we're back. And I also want to thank Mary Riley, who is our long-term member of the day. She signed up back in 2012. Join Charlene and Mary at www.joinpakman.com. You can save 40% off of your membership with the coupon code VOTESOON18 and pledge on Patreon at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Okay, even though the show was off for a few days for the 4th of July, a lot of activity on the David Pakman Show subreddit where nearly 7,000 of our viewers and listeners are now engaging in political discussion and waging the battle of ideas respectfully. A few interesting threads that I noticed this morning at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Damage control, Ron Paul claims staffer posted racist tweet. Yeah, I actually saw this during the break. There was an insane picture and meme posted by the official Ron Paul account that included like caricatured black people and Jews, and it was just insane. And then Ron Paul came out after the fact and said, I don't manage my own social media, and someone else did it, and it was deleted. I actually do believe Ron Paul. I just don't believe Ron Paul is on social media. I genuinely don't think he's posting his own stuff.
Well, I was thinking maybe the staffer also works for Ted Cruz and is the person who liked that porn video a few months back.
There seems to be a trend of staffers just doing horribly embarrassing things on social media. But I actually don't think Ron Paul is sitting there tweeting. I really do believe him.
He's like
in this
82
case.
years old.
Is he in his 80s?
Yeah.
I thought he was still in his 70s. Yeah. Ron Paul's not tweeting. I believe this. Okay, also from the subreddit, repeal and replace ICE, a better slogan than abolish ICE to win upcoming elections. Yeah, I actually said last week when I told you about the win of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I don't think abolish ICE is a winning platform for a couple different reasons. Number one, right now we're dealing with the 2018 midterms. Trump is still going to be president, and ICE is not going to be abolished between 2018 and 2020. And I think that it runs the risk of alienating voters because it sounds extreme. Even if we agree that, do we really need ICE? Is this really a government agency that we need? I think that there are other policies that you can make more central to your platform that will bring in more people than abolish ICE. And I actually don't think it's good political strategy to run on abolishing ICE. You don't have to agree with me. That's where I am. And I think reform ICE or repeal and replace ICE is a better strategy.
I mean, it isn't like it's a radical proposal, right? Because ICE only goes back to the Bush administration, post 9/11. But if it's not a winning strategy, why even employ it at all?
And I'm not even saying don't run on it for 2020 when the circumstances are different. I just don't think that Democrats need it for 2018, and I think it may prove counterproductive in some places. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, an article pointing out that Rachel Dolezal, also known as Kechi Diallo, this is the woman who I guess is not black but claimed to be black a couple years ago. Remember this crazy controversy? She was booked and released on welfare fraud and a number of other charges. And listen, I thought from the very beginning that this was not a great advocate for issues of racial equality and non-discrimination, whatever her intentions were in identifying as a black person. From the get-go, Pat, I just said, I don't even think we need to care about Rachel Dolezal. I just think we can move forward fighting for the issues we believe are important without adjudicating her place within that. It was weird when she claimed to be black, but wasn't, and the entire thing was weird to me. And quite frankly, I'm just not surprised to find out that she's been booked on welfare fraud.
Some would call it, transracialism, transrace.
Yes.
Maybe a problem we have to address as a society, or something we have to look into at some point.
Maybe at some point, but I think we should do it without including Rachel Dolezal in the broader conversation about racial non-discrimination in the United States. And I am mostly glad that she's dropped out of the limelight. And lastly, from the David Pakman Show subreddit, Donald Trump considered invading Venezuela, according to reports. One of the most disturbing and cartoonish revelations of the July 4th break. And we're going to talk more about that a little bit later in the program, but coming to the attention of many on the David Pakman Show subreddit. I invite you to subscribe for free to the David Pakman Show subreddit. I check it out. I check it out about daily. Are you on there roughly daily
Oh, I'm
as
there
well?
every day. I love
Yeah.
seeing the posts about myself, but I'm
Yeah.
also a very self-centered person.
Pat's there basically for reasons of vanity and self-aggrandizement, which is fine because that's actually why a lot of people are on the subreddit. But there's also a lot of people on the subreddit merely to engage in a polite and respectful political discussion. Find it at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Okay, let's talk about Anthony Kennedy. The retirement of Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy is very quickly becoming really concerning. And this is a crazy question that we have to ask, but we have to ask whether Anthony Kennedy was forced, induced, or pressured to resign because of financial dealings between his son, Justin Kennedy, and Donald Trump's businesses. And if this is the first you're hearing of this, I know when I first heard about this, I thought, no way, there's not even anything to look into here. But then we learned that actually it did come as a surprise to the other Supreme Court justices that Anthony Kennedy would be retiring, which is unusual. Usually the retiring justice lets the other justices know ahead of time. So that was strange. And then we learned about the very suspect relationship between Donald Trump and Justice Anthony Kennedy's son. And the first inkling of this actually came when Donald Trump gave his first speech to Congress in February of 2017. That first one after being inaugurated, not typically called the State of the Union, but it's effectively what it was. And we have audio and video. And in the video, you're going to see Donald Trump talking to Justice Anthony Kennedy about his son, talking about what a special guy Anthony Kennedy's son is. And Anthony Kennedy does look somewhat uncomfortable during the clip, to put it lightly. Let's take a listen.
Well, that's very nice. Coming from you, and say hello to your boy. A special guy. Well, they love him, and they love him in New York. That's right.
So we need a little more room.
Who's swearing in? We got a good guy.
So wait a second. What? How does Trump know Anthony Kennedy's son, Justin Kennedy? Well, it turns out that Justin Kennedy worked for Deutsche Bank for more than a decade. Already interesting, since Robert Mueller is looking extensively at Deutsche Bank as part of the Russia investigation, because at one point, Deutsche Bank was one of the only banks willing to lend to Donald Trump. And then we learn, well, it's not just that Justin Kennedy was working at Deutsche Bank when Trump was getting loans from Deutsche Bank. He was actually working directly on Trump projects. And Justin Kennedy is responsible for more than $1 billion in loans for real estate projects, once again, when other banks were opting not to work with Trump. So, okay, that gets a little stranger now in combination with the seemingly unexpected resignation of Anthony Kennedy. Now, I know that the right-wingers will hear me say that, and they'll write in and they'll say, David, guy's almost 82 years old, Anthony Kennedy. It's not a surprise to anyone that he's retiring. That's not the point. The point is that the other justices were reportedly surprised about the retirement, and that's not common no matter how old Anthony Kennedy is. So let's review. We've got the surprising sort of haphazard retirement announcement by Anthony Kennedy. We have the fact that Justin Kennedy loaned Trump money when other banks were turning away from Donald Trump. And then we also do have a year and a half of Supreme Court decisions where Anthony Kennedy, typically known as the sort of swing vote, moderate vote, sometimes the fifth vote out of 9 against an administration, voting frequently as the fifth vote for Donald Trump's administration at the Supreme Court. So we've got the swing vote who has been helping the Trump administration frequently since 2017, whose son happens to be the one guy lending more than $1 billion to Donald Trump while working at a bank that was fined $630 million for a $10 billion Russian money laundering scam in 2017, which has already come to the attention of Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. That's a lot of coincidences. And Richard Painter, who is the Bush administration ethics lawyer, believes that it stinks. And he tweeted over the weekend, the circumstances of Justice Kennedy's resignation must be investigated by the Senate Judiciary Committee before any replacement is considered. The Constitution does not give Trump the power to use underhanded means to induce Supreme Court resignations. I want to give Politico praise. Why Politico? because Politico caught this relationship more than a year ago, and I missed it, and many other people missed it. They had an article more than a year ago, in April of 2017, called Trump's Hidden Back Channel to Justice Kennedy, Their Kids. They were on it, and a lot of people missed it. Now, there's one other possibility, and I'll be upfront. This is all very circumstantial. There's another possibility, which is that Anthony Kennedy decided to retire because he's perfectly happy to leave his legacy and the future of the Supreme Court for a generation in the hands of Donald Trump. That's almost worse. That's actually almost worse than something sketchy coercing him into retirement. And thus, we are back to why Donald Trump will likely not face consequences for any of what he and his cronies have done. Because unless the House and Senate acts, much of what Trump has done will or would be, hypothetically, be adjudicated by the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court which is increasingly in the control of Donald Trump. The guy being investigated selects the judges who will determine his fate. At this point, I don't know that we can count on any actual resolution to much of what we have seen the Trump administration do during the campaign, before it was an administration, and since being inaugurated. Send me your thoughts. I want to know what you think about this. Is this something that we could even do anything about? I am, unfortunately, I think I'm just depressed about the reality of the situation. Discuss this with us on our subreddit, davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
All right, since we've been away and we have no interview scheduled for today, we're going to take a few phone calls. 617-830-4750 is the number. We'll start with our caller from 516. Go ahead, 516. What's on your mind?
Hey, guys. I just wanted to call in and voice concern about the issue of restaurants refusing service to people that they don't agree with.
Okay.
I know that I wouldn't want to serve somebody with odious opinions that I disagreed with, but I can see this going in a direction that gets very unpleasant. For example, things more important than where you have dinner. Things like somebody helping you with a broken down car, Con Edison giving you utility service. At what point should we draw the line and say that there are certain things that you can't discriminate against? Just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so I mean, you're bringing up a very specific, you're thinking about this the right way, which is where is a line crossed? So let's first talk about where the line would be crossed today, right? And then we can talk about what you think should be changed about that. You can't refuse service to people on a variety of different bases, right? You can't refuse service to people on the basis of their religion or nationality or gender. In some states, you can refuse service on the basis of their perceived or real sexual orientation. Depends on the state, depends how the law is. Now, you talked about Con Edison. Con Edison, of course, is a utility provider. Utility providers typically are not the same as a mom and pop restaurant or your local deli, and they have to provide service, period, right? I mean, in other words, they are the public utility of record. They are the contracted supplier of gas or electricity, depending on where you live. So that is not actually something that they would be able to do. So I think it's important for us to think about, when we think about what's okay and what's not okay, we should really understand what the law says. So Con Edison wouldn't be able to say, we're not going to give electricity to Trump supporters. They are legally bound to provide electrical service to everybody, period. They're not allowed to make that type of decision. A restaurant,
right?
That might be can't refuse people on the basis of religion,
example.
But they can on the basis of political beliefs right now. Are you saying that political beliefs should be a protected class?
I wouldn't go so far, because I know that although I I disagree with the person who refused to bake the cake for the gay couple.
Yeah.
I do think that there is a line. I know that I wouldn't want to be forced to bake a cake for, let's say, a Nazi or a neo-Nazi.
But you get how that's different, right? Like, let's make sure we understand the difference. If you're in a state where sexual orientation is a protected class, it would be against the law to refuse service on the basis of sexual orientation. White supremacist beliefs are not indicative of membership in any protected class. So you understand why the analogy is not an accurate one, right?
Right. So you're drawing a line between what classes in what states are protected by the law, and
right. Now, if what you're saying is you want to
classes-
change that, if you're saying you want political beliefs protected as you want sexual orientation protected, or maybe you don't want either protected, that's the debate to have. Beyond that, it's just an opinion thing, right? Like, you think it will get ugly if restaurants say people with certain political beliefs not welcome. That's certainly a position you can have. I would argue that the reason that that's happening is because of really ugly things that are being done by this administration, and it's just a debate people can sort of have.
Right. I don't think that the restaurant issue is where it might get ugly. I think that if it starts extending to more important services, maybe not as extreme an example as Con Edison supplying electricity, but other important things that people rely on in their daily lives.
Well, give me an example. So if it's not a restaurant but not electric, where are you concerned? What would be a concerning example?
Let's say your car breaks down and you go to the local guy to fix it. You need to, let's say you're out of state and you're driving home.
Yep.
Person sees a Trump sticker, says, I don't want to serve you.
You think that should be illegal?
I don't know if it should be illegal, but that's definitely where the issue is going to get uglier than, restaurants
Fair
taking
point.
out.
Fair point. No, that's true. You're definitely talking about something much closer to people's livelihood, particularly in this heat. Breaking down in this heat could be bad. Let me think about that more, but I really appreciate you bringing it up.
Sure. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Thank you so much. 617-830-4750. Just checking in with people, seeing we're back from 4th of July. Let's go to the 845 area code. 845, what's on your mind?
Hey, this is Mark Benjamin. First off, I want to give you props on that question you answered from Tim Pool's tweet about healthcare.
Okay, yeah, I don't think the audience has no idea what you're talking about, but there was a tweet that Tim Pool posted.
Oh, there was a tweet about
but it doesn't read well for the show, I think.
Be a right?
Yeah, no, I know, but I think that
and you tweeted him something about
I did.
You gave him a very good response. He also liked the response. I just wanted to give you props for that as a quickie.
Thank you.
And the next two questions are actually questions.
Okay.
This question is, can you make a series on, like, not just cryptocurrencies, but investments and just financial stuff? Because I think there's lots of right-leaning outlets that are doing something along those lines, but a lot of people, I think, need a bit help or a bit direction to understand how to keep themselves financially stable or safe.
Yeah.
Because Medicare for all and UBI is kind of like a dream that's not going to happen anytime soon.
I got you.
And
So listen, I've thought about
just
this. People sometimes will request this, Mark. Here's the concern. I sort of make an effort on the show always to say I'm not giving financial advice. Like, sometimes I'll talk about what I do, or I'll talk about what I consider to be best practices, prioritizing having an emergency fund and sort of understanding elements of not trying to time the market, or why index funds with what all this different stuff. But I always say this is not actually financial advice for anybody in particular. I worry that if I actually start doing segments where I am saying, here is actual advice, but just know it might not be good advice for you personally, and like you should always consult with I just worry that then it's like, well, no, I am now giving financial advice, and usually that's the whole thing, that I'm not giving financial advice.
Oh, as long as you do that disclaimer, I think you're safe. Recently, a lot of YouTubers on the crypto end of things does something along that, like, this is not financial advice.
Yeah.
And they give like this might not apply to, et cetera, but if you do like more interviews along those lines, or something that like would help the people that are on the bottom kind of keep themselves solvent, or on the or have some ideas to help them crawl out of it, because I think you're a really good teacher, and I think that that you might be able to pull that off? And the last question will be relatively quick. Do you think that we should answer political questions on the left and the right within the idea of, if things get to the extreme, I don't want this hitting me in the back, because we don't exactly know if, say, a populist right worse than Trump happens, or a populist left that is relatively bad pops up, that, uses social manipulation.
Mark, I
whatever,
don't understand that last question, and I want to give other people a chance to talk, so I'm glad I got you one answer at least, and we'll try again on that last question next time. I appreciate the call. Let's go to our next caller, 202 area code. Caller from 202, go ahead.
Hey, David, this is Nabil calling from Boston, actually not too far from you guys. I was wondering if you caught the Ben Shapiro appearance on Real Time with Bill Maher. I think it was Friday.
No, I didn't. What happened?
Well, it was the usual prepubescent sophistry from Ben Shapiro, but he mentioned one thing which I wanted to get your opinion on. That was, I think Bill Maher asked him, what are you going to do in 2020? And he said it depends, but he said he thinks most of the damage to the social fabric that Trump has done has already been done, and he really can't do much more. The damage is already there, so he was deploying this as an argument for why he still might vote for Trump, despite Trump's awfulness. I think he's doing it as a way to avoid saying how he pretty much aligns with all of Trump's policies and doesn't want to admit it. But what do you think about that? Was it just a complete excuse, or you think there's some element of truth to that?
There's two possibilities, right? One is the one you bring up, which is Ben Shapiro has been tepid about Trump, but in reality, he loves Trump's policies and he wants to figure out a way to sort of say, hey, it doesn't really matter if the guy wins again because the damage has been done, and it's hiding his support for Trump. There's another view, which is that Shapiro is disgusted with Trump, but he wants to not alienate a lot of his right-wing audience, which loves Trump. Mm-hmm. So he's doing it. He's sort of playing coy for that reason. I honestly have no idea. It's been like 2 years since I've emailed with Ben Shapiro at all, and I've never spoke. I have no idea what his sincere views are about Trump. I think somebody like Dave Rubin might be well positioned to tell you, because I know that they've been hanging out a lot. But I have no idea what's going on in Ben Shapiro's mind.
Well, that's definitely a good thing, and you're better for it. But my question isn't so much about the Ben Shapiro angle of it. It's more about what he actually said. Do you think there's any truth to what he said?
No. I think that there is untold damage that Trump could do in the future. I think, we've only marginally avoided Trump invading multiple countries. We found out, as we're going to talk about on the show today, that he was way into invading Venezuela. Getting out of the Iran deal could be a precursor to going in there. If the North Korea deal goes south, we may be looking at invading North Korea. It's been the Russia commingling that has probably kept him from doing more in Syria. So I think that there is an insane amount of damage that Trump could do. And that's just talking outside the U.S., never mind inside the U.S. So I don't agree whatsoever with the assertion.
I completely agree. Thank you so much.
All right. Very much appreciate the call from Nabil in the Boston area. Always good. Surprised me because it wasn't from a Boston area code. All right. Next caller from the 682 area code. Go ahead.
Hey, David. This is Colby in Austin again.
Go ahead, Colby.
Well, I was going to ask you, last week you mentioned that you were, not a big fan of the abolish ICE or the lesser-known melt ICE movement because you thought it was, not pragmatic. Could you go into that a little bit more? Or,
yeah, we actually did address this earlier on today's show, so you'll see the clip when it's out. But basically, here's my thing. Right now, we're dealing with the midterms. You're not going to abolish ICE while Trump is president unless something insanely unlikely happened, meaning that for all intents and purposes, between 2018 and 2020, or between 2019 and 2021, as the term will be, you're not going to abolish ICE. And I think that it may be perceived as an extreme position. I do think that reform, repeal and replace ICE, something like that is perfectly reasonable. Fix ICE, I don't know. I think that there's, from a pragmatic standpoint, more to be gained by focusing on other platform areas for the midterm elections. And then, I'm not against the abolishment of ICE. I'm just saying I think pragmatically it might not be the best strategy for the midterms.
Yeah, I think I share the same instinct as you that people might view that as a little bit extreme. I guess for me personally, I've just gotten behind more of the idea of asking for the full loaf. Like whatever you want, you ask for that, and you deal with the pragmatism once you are debating the policy or the bills that are on the table.
It's not a crazy position because, I mean, remember, had President Obama been stronger about a serious public option or even something to the left, he might have ended up further to the left in his negotiation for what Obamacare ultimately was. So your view is not invalid. I'm applying it just hyper specifically to ICE for the 2018 election.
Right. All right. Sounds good. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate the call. Thanks to everybody who called. We will take a quick break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Stunning new report from the Associated Press claims that Donald Trump was seriously considering a Venezuelan invasion in late August of 2017. There was actually a meeting in late August where sanctions on Venezuela were discussed. And at the end of the meeting was sort of wrapping up, and Donald Trump asked his top aides who were around him, why can't we just invade Venezuela? And according to the senior administration official who spoke about this meeting, people in the room were stunned, which is a common theme when Donald Trump speaks. Then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and then National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, both of whom, interestingly, are no longer working for Trump, immediately started to explain to Trump why invading Venezuela is not a good idea. And as the conversation is described, McMaster and other people in the room kind of took turns explaining to Trump the different reasons why it's a bad idea, how it could backfire, how it could completely squander the support that has been built among other Latin American leaders to push back against the Venezuelan regime for going down the dictatorial path. And apparently the experts in the room didn't really dissuade Donald Trump, because the next day Trump was talking to friends about the, quote, military option in Venezuela to remove Nicolas Maduro from power. And then Trump still kept going with it the following month in September when he spoke to 4 different Latin American leaders, including the Colombian president. And all 4 of those leaders said to Trump in abundantly clear terms, yeah, we don't want to use the military option in Venezuela. And this is how volatile the guy is, right? On a whim, he's talking about the sanction solution seems complicated. What about just invading Venezuela? And even his top advisors with relatively significant experience, although maybe not Rex Tillerson, can't talk him out of it. And I really want to talk it through, because if you're a regular viewer of the David Pakman Show, you probably know that I don't support the Venezuelan regime. And there's this strain of the left. It's a sort of what I call a Leninist strain that loves Hugo Chavez and loves Nicolas Maduro and seems to think that Venezuela is just great and that these are truly progressive populist leaders. I'm not in that group, right? I don't support authoritarian dictators. I don't care whether their rhetoric sounds progressive. Their implementations are total strongman authoritarianism, and I don't support that, and no leftist should. That being said, an American invasion of Venezuela is an obviously disastrous idea. The United States is one of the reasons that so many Latin American countries have people wanting to come to the United States, legally or illegally. And I've talked before about how American foreign policy towards Latin America can either drive people to try to come to the United States illegally, or it can improve conditions in their home countries so that people will be more likely to want to stay. And an American invasion of Venezuela would only perpetuate the conditions that make people want to come to the United States in the first place. That's number one. Now, number two, look at the history of American interventions in Latin America. Absolute unmitigated disaster. And if the Maduro regime is to be pushed out of power, and I want it to be pushed out of power because it's an abomination, it needs to be with as little American involvement as possible. I want Maduro out, right? Maduro and Chavez have been atrocious spectacles in Venezuela. But a U.S. military-led intervention is not what should remove Maduro from power. And to circle back to the Trump foreign policy aspect of this, remember that we were told by the pro-Trump crowd and actually by the anti-Hillary crowd, which are not always the same groups, they're overlapping groups in some way. We were told Hillary, if she wins, will start a ton of wars, but Trump wouldn't. I'm asking you now, what military intervention has Trump opposed as president? He's been in favor of a ton of them. He's been talked out of it by aides or by foreign leaders. Syria, were it not for the Russia factor, we might already be way more involved in Syria. Iran, if you want to do something in Iran, certainly you've got to get out of that Iran deal, which Donald Trump is doing. Venezuela, okay, it seems like he was talked out of it. North Korea, if his deal backfires, how quickly will the military option be back on the table? I'm not seeing that Donald Trump is far less likely to get involved in wars than Hillary Clinton would have been.
You know, I just blame this statement on Trump's incompetence, right? Because he doesn't do the homework, he doesn't read the briefings every day,
right?
But he still wants to contribute to the conversation. So when his advisors are talking about what we can do, you know, economically or militarily, he just is left out of the conversation because he doesn't really know those intricacies.
You think that's
so
what's going on?
Yeah, so he says, well, why don't we just invade the country?
It might be useful if he read those daily briefings. Like maybe there would be something communicated there which would leave him with an understanding of why it's not a great idea to think about just invading. But again, this is the guy who wasn't totally sure why it wasn't a good idea to consider using nuclear weapons on Europe during the presidential campaign. So it does seem like he has this tendency.
I think he asked 3 times why we couldn't use nuclear weapons against North Korea. You have to explain that to him 3 times?
Yeah, it should only take twice, 2 explanations, right, before a normal person gets it. Hey, I am inspired by the heartwarming concern over whether I might be losing my citizenship status here in the United States because of this Trump administration initiative. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think I'm going to be losing my citizenship. An example email to me over the weekend said, hey, David, Trump is going to take away citizenship from people who came to the U.S. legally but have a criminal record. You were once arrested for underage drinking. Are you in trouble? Might you be losing your citizenship? And what people are writing in about is an announcement from the Trump administration from about a week or so ago that they're going to look at stripping citizenship from people who were not born citizens but who were naturalized as citizens because of irregularities related to their naturalization. So first and foremost, this is a really rare thing. Since 1990, only 300 civil cases asking for the denaturalization of citizens have been carried out. But it's true that the Trump administration is ramping up efforts to do this. So let's kind of take it in pieces so we understand it. This is not immigrants who have been naturalized who then were arrested for drunk driving or larceny or whatever, right? This is people who have irregularities in their naturalization, meaning that they assumed a new identity to avoid getting deported or assumed a new identity to get a green card or to get citizenship. We're talking about that type of irregularity. So what was my situation? I moved to the United States at age 5. When I was 16, in the year 2000, my parents became citizens of the United States, and I was not automatically a citizen. I had 2 options. I could go to the post office up until age 18 and just request a passport, and I would automatically become a citizen because my parents had been made citizens. Or if I waited until I turned 18, I would still be entitled to citizenship whenever I wanted automatically, but I would have to go through the full process on my own. And initially, I had no plans to actually become a citizen of the United States when I was 16. But then George W. Bush was elected late in the year 2000. He was inaugurated in 2001. And my parents said to me, we don't know what's going to happen with immigration policy and George W. Bush. We are now citizens. We're staying here. You should just do it. So I did. And I really hesitated for a while because I kind of felt like I would lose my Argentinian identity if I became a citizen of the United States. But once I understood why it made sense and what could be coming with the Bush administration, and once I realized I live here, my life is in the United States, I did it, right, when I was 17 years old. Much later, when I was 20 and a half, just 6 months shy of my 21st birthday, I was caught holding a beer, which I'd not even had a sip of yet, at a college party, and I was arrested. I was never indicted. I was sent to some class about how drinking is bad, not a problem that I had, fortunately. And that is now completely gone from my record because it had been 10 years. So I'm okay. I'm okay. But there are people who are being targeted for this.
Yeah, I think you should be good so long as you promise that you'll never drink underage again.
Exactly, in which I've made that promise a number of different times. So let's talk about what the Trump administration is doing. The Trump administration can legally target people who were naturalized under irregular circumstances. The truth is, it's very rare. And we know that these are folks who are less likely to commit crime. If you know that if you come to the attention of law enforcement, all of a sudden, the circumstances of your naturalization might go public, you are more likely to avoid committing crimes so that you don't get on the radar of law enforcement in the first place. So I'm not saying ignore what people have done if it's against the law. What I'm saying is that the amount of government time and money required relative to the benefit doesn't really make sense as something that I would focus on. But to the Hatriots, you will be very disappointed. No indication at this time that I am going to be shipped back to Argentina. I hate to make them sad after such a patriotic holiday, but it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Okay, today on the bonus show, we are going to talk about my 4th of July break as well as Pat's 4th of July break. And I had such a great experience back in my old neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. As many of you know, from August 2013 to June 2015, the David Pakman Show broadcast from New York City. I lived in Brooklyn. I was back in New York City for a wedding weekend, and I went back to my old spots in Brooklyn. This includes the great cocktail bar Clover Club. It includes all sorts of different places. I was back in my stomping grounds.
Sounds very nostalgic.
It was an incredibly nostalgic weekend. And I walk into the great Smith Street Bagels, formerly known as Mocha Bagels, on Smith Street in Brooklyn. And I'm there with my girlfriend, and I order my egg and Swiss on an everything bagel, lightly toasted, as I often do. And I get to the front of the line, and I see that Eddie is still running the cash register at Smith Street Bagels. The place has been renovated. They've got a hipster espresso bar. They've got all sorts of new stuff, but it's still Eddie. He immediately recognizes me and says, "Dave, where have you been?" And I have a backstory with Eddie because once I leave reviews on Yelp, so I remember what places I like, if I'm in the neighborhood, whatever. And I left a review that was, I will admit, mediocre because of a bad experience I had my first time at the former Mocha Bagels. And Eddie read the review. He found out, who is this David Pakman? He found out about the show, and next time I went in, he recognized me, and he said, "I know about your review. I was really upset to hear about your experience. My customers are like family." He gave me some free black and white cookies. And ever since, I would go in there and talk to Eddie. I had been gone for almost 3 years from Brooklyn, and he immediately recognized me. He said he's still following the show, that the team at Smith Street Bagels, they support what we're doing. And it was great. And it was a great instance of community and I don't know what else to call it, friendship and inspiration. So if you're ever in Brooklyn, go visit Eddie at Smith Street Bagels. Tell him that you heard about it on the David Pakman Show, and he's got great bagels. And don't miss the black and white cookies, please.
Yeah, very heartwarming story. He must have known that you moved to Boston, though, right? If he's a regular viewer of the show.
He was aware that I was no longer in New York City. I don't know. He immediately parodied and satirized the stereotypical Boston accent, so he seemed to have somewhat of an inkling of what was going on. But yes, go see Eddie, Smith Street Bagels. Shout out to him. And both of us, we'll talk more about our vacations in proper terms on the bonus show today. www.joinpakman.com, patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.